Good evening. I'm David Nicholas. Next here on CMU Public Television, Congressman Dan Benishek joins me here on Capitol Report.
Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
Thanks again for being with us here on this Tuesday night as we welcome for the first time to this program Congressman Dr. Dan Benishek, a Republican born in Iron River and currently serving in his second term for the 1st District. Good to see you, Doctor and Congressman. Welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me on, Dave. Appreciate it.
As we sit down today, news actually this morning when I was on with Morning Edition of the, once again, over the attack on the diplomatic mission in Benghazi, Libya. There remain accusations as to a potential cover-up as to what took place there. A special committee now being formed to continue or re-examine that investigation. You came out late last week in support of this. What do we know presently, and where do you think this investigation is taking us?
Well, the House of Representatives has been basically making sure that American people don't forget about what happened in Benghazi. And it's been under the jurisdiction of more than one committee. So I think that the speakers made a decision, let's coordinate this with one special investigative committee and really get to the bottom of this in view of the recent emails that have come out. Apparently they were redacted in the previous submissions from the department. And, you know, they've just revealed through a Freedom of Information request. So, you know, why was that information redacted for Congress, but now it comes out later? So there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered about Benghazi, about what happened. I think it's worthy to continue to investigate. After all, 4 of our diplomatic mission died in a raid that there's been some controversy what it was all about.
From what you've been told, where do you think the source or sources of the delay in the full range of the information being brought to light? Where have those delays been centered?
Well, I think the committee's going to, you know, have to investigate that. I think the State Department has a role to play. As you know, the assistant ambassador had some testimony early on in the investigation. It sort of contradicted what the State Department said at first, and I think there's a lot more answers that need to be given to the American people about what happened there. I mean, certainly the circumstances, why was there not better security there on 9/11, the anniversary of the attack in New York? And I think we should have been better prepared, number one, and the response could have been better, number two.
Also late this past week, you and several colleagues again called for renewed efforts to address the prevalence of sexual assault and domestic violence. And last year you introduced a resolution in the House that would make it easier for victims in the military to come forward when these incidents occur. Is the rate of occurrence disproportionately higher when it takes place in the members of the military? What do we know about what we see from one part of society to another?
The tragedy of sexual assault in the military is that 87% of the attacks go unreported, and that victims of sexual assault in the military feel hesitant to report it because they're afraid of repercussions. I think that's just a tragedy. It needs to stop immediately. It's an epidemic. There's like 28,000 incidents of sexual assault in the military in the last year, according to the Department of Defense own numbers in a survey that they did. And I've been working with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York, a Democrat, trying to be sure that the military changes the way that they deal with sexual assault so that people aren't afraid to report it. Basically bring it outside the chain of command. Right now, a commanding officer can decide not to prosecute someone, even if there's adequate evidence there and the prosecutor wants to prosecute. The commander can decide not to do it for the good of the Corps or the good of whatever. So I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. And Senator Gillibrand and I, along with many others, are working to get it so that you can go outside the chain of command within the military, but let's not have the commander have the ability to stop a prosecution. And this is a process that works well in Canada, it works well in Britain, the Israelis do it, Norway. Other countries have done this without having a breakdown in command. The military establishment is sort of like pushed back on this thing. It'll break down the command structure. And if it seems to work in these other countries well and brings about an increased amount of reporting so we can put a stop to this epidemic, then I'm all for it.
About 7 years ago, we heard several concerns raised, and it became quite a widespread scandal, as it were, about treatment conditions at Walter Reed Hospital. And we fast forward to now when concerns are being raised over the operation and alleged wrongdoing at a facility in Phoenix, Arizona. What do we know about, for those that have not heard about that, perhaps as widely as the Walter Reed story, what has been taking place there to the best of your knowledge, and what are you now doing and calling more attention to this?
Well, let me start off by saying that, I'm a doctor. I've been taking care of patients for 30 years. I worked at the VA hospital in Iron Mountain for about 20 years. And I think, for the most part, those people are dedicated, especially the clinicians on the ground. I think in the management at the VA, there's a lot of efforts to downplay a lot of this stuff. What's happened in Phoenix was the allegation that there was 2 separate lists to get in to see a physician. And if you didn't get in to see a physician within we couldn't get them an appointment for 2 weeks, they put you on a separate waiting list. And that waiting list may have been purged, or there are undue waits there. They're in the middle of an Inspector General investigation now, so they're keeping the details about the investigation sort of closely held until there may be prosecutions involved. So I don't have all the details. We've investigated similar types of investigations in LA, and frankly, I've been working on my subcommittee on health, and along with the investigations subcommittee, to make sure that these bureaucrats that work for the VA are held accountable. I mean, right now you get somebody in front of you in the committee, they won't even tell you the name of the person on the ground who was responsible. And that's just unconceivable to me that they're allowed to do that. We just passed a VA spending bill last week, which we were able to get an amendment that none of the senior management people at VA are going to get a bonus this year as long as this backlog of claims is taking place. And we get to the bottom of these, multiple allegations throughout the system of cover-ups of mismanagement. And, part of our job really in this, in Congress is to make the American people aware of the mismanagement in all these different agencies. That's what we're doing on Benghazi. That's what I'm working on hard in the VA. It's a pleasure working on the VA committee. Frankly, it's bipartisan. I think that Democrats and the Republicans both on the committee want this bureaucracy to perform to a higher standard. We meet regularly with senior leadership, and we really need to be sure that these large bureaucracies within the government are responsive to these problems and deal with it. I mean, nobody seems to get fired. Somebody has a problem at one place, they're sent to another place with an equal amount of responsibility. I worked on legislation to actually put, these mismanagement in somebody's performance report. Make sure they don't get a bonus, make sure they don't get an advancement, have some actual consequences to, your malfeasance or your mismanagement.
How much of that did you come in direct contact, or did you begin to get a sense of that was going on when you were working, the time you spent working in the hospital itself? I mean, how much did the administrative end and the bureaucratic end overlap the actual direct care for the veterans?
Well, that happened because of the fact that one hand wasn't listening to the other. A specific example was that, the administrator of the hospital, for example, got rid of the sterilizer in the hospital without talking to the chief of surgery. So all of a sudden, the VA hospital doesn't have a sterilizer. Well, that's a real problem.
And this was explained how?
Well, they're going to get a new sterilizer. So in order to get ready for the new sterilizer, they got rid of the old one. But it turns out it's going to take a year to get a new one. So that was not a very good solution to the problem. You understand what I mean? I mean, it's like, really? You're going to change?
Were delays like that common in other areas that you saw too?
The hospital that I worked in actually was pretty good, but that's just an example of the kind of miscommunication or bad management that can happen. And people just aren't held accountable enough. We were able to change things in Iron Mountain. That facility's working much better. I mean, they had a situation where, for example, the director of the hospital would change every 2 years. Well, when the director of the hospital changes every 2 years, for the first 6 months, he doesn't know where the bathroom is. The last 6 months, he's thinking about his next job. So, and his whole team changes with that. Well, how does that provide continuity for the administration of the hospital? That's sort of standard, throughout the VA. That's not a good way of doing it, and me being there, bringing that up, changed that. Well, that's a lot better for the veterans in Iron Mountain. And, my knowledge of the inner workings there, having worked there, it's a lot easier for these guys to pull the wool over your eyes.
Related to this, then, for the broader issue of healthcare, veterans, and all of society, then there has been and continues to be obviously debate over the very structure and the essence of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. You've recently been out on what you've called a listening tour to gain some sense of constituents across the district and what they are saying. From what you see as far as how it has been handled in Washington to what folks have been telling you back home as to how successful it has been or has not, what prospects are now and for the future, what is your assessment of the ACA to this point?
Well, I think it's a failure. I think it's bad medicine for America. Like I say, I've practiced medicine for over 30 years. I understand what healthcare is about. I understand there's challenges in healthcare. Certainly the old way was not perfect, but the Affordable Care Act changes things to make it. Number one, it hasn't lowered costs. Most people have seen who've had insurance have seen a huge increase. The biggest concern that I learned on this healthcare tour, and which I realized before, but actually speaking to hospital administrators, doctors, nurses, I visited 12 different facilities in the district in the last 3 weeks. And they're all very concerned about being able to stay open, because a huge part of the Affordable Care Act is cutting reimbursement to hospitals for their Medicare. In other words, if a hospital takes care of a Medicare patient, that payment that they get from Medicare is going down. That's $2 billion in cuts to my district alone over the next 10 years. Well, there's a lot of small hospitals through my district, okay, and they've been cutting costs for the last 20 years dealing with Medicare reimbursement, insurance, pay less. So they've really been paring down costs. But it gets to the point where the hospital won't remain in the black. They won't be able to afford new equipment. They'll be able to close. There's been layoffs through the majority of the hospitals in my district within the last 6 months. And many of the facilities, expecting further cuts and further mandates from the feds, are looking at the potential of having to close. Now, we lost a hospital in my district already in Sheboygan due to a dispute with Medicare people. I mean, that was 400 jobs that were gone. Well, they have an emergency room there now and some day clinics, but it's like a little over 100 employees. Well, that's a pretty big loss for the small community of Sheboygan. Also, the loss of access to local health care is huge. My district is really rural. It's sometimes 100 miles to the next hospital. So that's access to care. And I want to make sure that people in my district continue to have access for care. I think the Affordable Care Act is really limiting that.
What would you and those that have been critical then of what is now has been made the law, the land, to address problems like this? When Congressman Camp was with us on the program, he talked about a proposal he had on the table in 2009 that would have addressed many of the concerns at the time with a health care reform approach. And by the nature of politics, it did not see the light of debate on the floor. For his district, which covers so much of central and northern Michigan, and then further north into your district with the UP, that is probably one of the number one concerns is the access, the amount of rural populations that we see. How do we reform the present system, make sure that people do have the access that they need?
That's the question. The Affordable Care Act hasn't lowered costs. All right, what we need is a patient-centered system so the patient maintains control of health care. It's their money to begin with. They should have control of the dollars. And we need to open up the health insurance business to more competition. As you know, in the state of Michigan, there are very few health insurance providers. I like to compare health insurance with car insurance. Well, we can buy our car insurance from any one of 1,000 companies across the country. Why can't we do that with health care? Why can't we pick the coverage that we want? I mean, your car insurance can cover whatever you want to cover or what not. That's not the way with health care. You have to have certain coverages mandated by the Affordable Care Act. Why can't you get the same benefit to buy the insurance personally rather than have your employer buy it? You don't get this. If you buy it personally, you're paying more taxes. We should have an equal playing field so the individual can buy their health insurance with the same tax break that employers get. That only makes sense. Then you could take the insurance wherever you went to work. I mean, you don't change your car insurance when you change employers. I mean, how ridiculous does it sound when you compare it? So just doing that would bring a lot more competition into the health insurance market and make these insurance companies leaner and less expensive. The other thing we need to do is we need to make the cost transparent. I mean, you don't even know what an MRI costs at one place versus another. Why can't you advertise what you charge so that people can shop? Anything else, if you shop for it, if you're an oil change for your car, the first, price makes a difference. Well, it's against the law for me as a physician to tell another physician what I even accept from Medicare. We can't even do that. It's like, antitrust. So, I mean, how goofy is that?
How many of these ideas are someplace in writing? Because as I move towards asking this next question, I can hear multiple voices in both ears screaming at me saying, well, you know that the critics are saying that the Republican opposition is that it's simply a matter of saying no, that there's not an actual plan, and people saying, well, you can't totally repeal if you don't have a solution in place, and others say we should have never rushed to it if we didn't know the full implications. So I hear the debate, and I hear from both sides all the time as to how we got to this point in 2009 and moving forward versus trying to come up with something that at least there's some voice given from both sides that says it needs to be revamped somewhat, but how do you undo what's already in place, et cetera, and you've heard the cyclical debate as well.
Yeah. Well, there's several bills out there that the Republicans have put out. I think the best one, the one I support, is Tom Price's bill from Georgia. I think it's H.R. 3000 is the number, but it's his bill, which incorporates, the two of the things I just mentioned to you, and as well as making sure that people have the access to their parents' insurance until they're 26, and that people with pre-existing diseases can have access to a policy. Those are common sense things that the Affordable Care Act speeded up happening, and certainly would be part of a Republican plan as well. So I think that's probably the number one piece of legislation that's written down that you can look at and judge for yourself. But I think that these ideas need to be discussed before the American people. And this Health Care Act, I mean, even Nancy Pelosi didn't read it. I mean, isn't this major revamping of the U.S., 1/7 of the U.S. economy worth some discussion, worth some argument, worth some airing? And that's what we want to do, is not, revamp the whole of healthcare without having a discussion in front of the American people. I mean, that's what should have happened before this. And unfortunately, it didn't. And a lot of the voices, like Dave's camp, was not heard in 2009.
If people tend to, voters at least get labeled, whether it's strictly by the media or in general, if this is the behavior that we see, reduce election issues down to my wallet, my back pocket, my checking account, how much of this becomes, and where does it incorporate an overall look at jobs in the economy moving into an election, a midterm election that we see coming up?
Well, I'm looking for solutions. I'm like I say, I never really was involved with politics before I took this job. I was a general surgeon taking care of patients. There's no Republicans or Democrats in the operating room. We're all working together to solve a problem. And I want to solve some problems. And I'm willing to work with anybody that will do that. Like I say, with the sexual assault bill, I worked with a Democrat senator from New York. How different from me is that? And we were able to work together and agree on a lot of the fundamentals there. And that happens on the VA committee all the time. And so it's not really Republicans or Democrats. It's, finding solutions to problems. I'm willing to work with anybody. I'm concerned, the reason I ran for Congress in the first place, though, is the fact that we're spending money we don't have. All right, we're first time in the history of our country, we're spending money and we're making our children pay that debt back, leading them to less opportunity and less job availability with the uncertainty of that debt. I want my children and grandchildren to be able to live and work in northern Michigan, to have opportunity for a job that you can raise a family on, you can buy a truck on, you can live and go hunting and fishing in northern Michigan. That's the type of jobs we need here in that. And sometimes we get into arguments with people on the other side of the aisle, but want more and more regulations. And regulate, a lot of the federal government regulations are killing jobs in northern Michigan. I mean, I think that we need to have clean air and clean water and jobs in northern Michigan. I think we can do both. But when some of these federal agencies over-regulate to the point that there's no job opportunity, it's very frustrating to me.
Given the seasonal nature that we see for the economy of the UP in northern Michigan that makes up your district, as Michigan has been forced to change the face, basically the one economic engine driven by the auto industry, how is that changing economy evolving in the years now moving forward for the UP and northern Michigan as a whole?
Well, I think that we did do something positive in Washington. We got a farm bill passed, for example. Agriculture is the second largest industry in the state of Michigan. It's a huge industry in my district. I got on the agriculture committee this term. We were able to get many Michigan provisions in the farm bill to give our farmers some certainty over the next 5 years. That's huge. I mean, we just had a farmer in Newberry invest $4 million in irrigation and potato storage in Newberry, Michigan. A little town in the UP doesn't have much industry, but all of a sudden the farmer invested $4 million in agriculture, which put the electricians, who put the concrete guys, put the irrigation guys to work in Newberry for a good year getting that stuff set up. So promoting and making sure that Michigan agriculture thrives is great for jobs in northern Michigan. The outdoor economy in northern Michigan is huge. Making sure that, for example, we got the Sleeping Bear Dunes legislation passed. That was something that Northeast Michigan has been working on for 12 years. Now we have some certainty that Sleeping Bear Dunes Park will continue to have access to its beaches and its roads for tourists and the local people. That's 2,800 jobs that are secured now in northern Michigan. I'm working hard on an educational initiative to make sure that career and technical education, vocational education, is thriving in northern Michigan. We've had some federal and state policies that have limited the curriculum of high schools so that kids don't even get exposed to the trades anymore. When I went to school, maybe when you went to school, there was an active voc ed department where you could get construction trades, you could get auto mechanics, you could get machining and welding. A lot of our schools have lost that because of demands from the state and the feds on making sure that kids get to college prep. There's only 2 credit hours of electives in the whole high school curriculum. That's not right. We need to have opportunity to at least expose young people to the jobs that are available. The governor says there's 70,000 jobs available in the state of Michigan for which people don't have the training for. And many of these jobs are the vocational skills, the trades. We need to be sure that our young people get exposed to trades. Our office is working with school districts, community colleges, small businesses to make sure that they're working together so that the community college knows what the local manufacturer needs as far as training, so that there's opportunity for kids to go to a manufacturing facility and see what the jobs look like and realize, hey, these are good paying, house buying, truck buying, family raising jobs right here in your area. And maybe you don't need a 4-year degree. Maybe you can get a 2-year welding certificate and get $100,000 a year job in UP. That's the type of thing that we need to focus on. My office is working on helping school districts find grants for that kind of thing. We have been successful. I think making sure that there's fewer regulations, more opportunity for an education that leads to a job, and lower cost health care are three things that will really help improve the job situation in Northern Michigan.
A lot of things raised here even that we didn't necessarily anticipate even as we sat down, which is fine. Some discussions we'll have to pick up on the FM side of things. And I know the logistics of where the district is, even though it overlaps our audience, it's a difficult thing to make the arrangements to have you here. I'm glad we were able to have this opportunity today. Hope it won't be the last. And some of these we'll pick up in discussions on down the road. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks so much for your time and attention as well. We've been talking with Congressman and Dr. Dan Benishek of Michigan's 1st District. This is the concluding program to this current season of Capitol Report. It will be repeated again tonight in our overnight lineup, and then join the others in this current season on our website. You can go to under WCMU.org and click on the TV button, go to the local productions, and you'll find the link to Capitol Report for all of our current programs. A great way to end our season as we were able to bring in the head of the DNR, Keith Cray, and 3 successive congressmen to our program, along with all the state lawmakers we've spoken to this season. Hope we'll be able to do more of that as we head into the season next year. For all of us here, for our technical director, Chris Ogazali, and our crew, I'm David Nicholas. Thanks very much. We'll talk again soon.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.